Okay, I think our guests are here. Are you here? Ophelia, are you here? Yeah, here they come. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Michelle. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Michelle Cook is a founding member of the Water Protector Legal Collective, as I promised earlier on the program, who's going to be joining us to talk about the government's violation of Indigenous peoples' rights. We also have, hold on, let me make sure I have the other. I have four panelists here, but Ophelia is missing. Let me see.
Oh, you
I'm
can't
gonna
hear me?
Ophelia, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay.
Oh,
Thus, you
there
have
you
to
come. I just sent you
click
an
to
invite. There
turn
you
on
are.
the. Oh, there
Hi.
you are.
Hi.
Thank you very much for joining us on this program. I really appreciate it. It's a joy to have you here. The Trump administration is fast tracking corporate projects that are killing the environment and rolling back EPA regulations that make our air breathable, which seems important. It's now begun blasting sites within Arizona's Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, which includes sites sacred to Native American groups, in order to construct Trump's border wall. Here to talk about what this means for Indigenous communities are Michelle Cook and Ofelia Rivas. Thank you so much for joining me. Have I pronounced your names properly?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I'd like to say a few things in my language, as it is very typical for us. The Baroche Manisis up and Tath Gia Hermojaman. Maapaga Upagajo, Jules Haichamon, Get Tam to Jo. So just appreciating our ancestors and our land, and which is the base of our culture here, that has been under attack, especially specifically, if we want to talk about the wall, is after 9/11, the increase of the military called the Border Patrol, which are heavily armed and have been committing human rights violations without any check from any government source or anyone. And
Well,
now the construction of the border wall and the integrated fixed towers that will be continuing to monitor us, and we're under surveillance anyway,
my
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in my
gosh,
homelands.
Yeah, and
I
I
am
think it's
sorry.
important when we frame the conversation that we don't start off with calling this Trump's border wall. The fact is that the wall has been an issue that has existed regardless of political parties. It's something that, of course, as indigenous peoples who have lived in what is now known as the United States since time immemorial, the border that carved up what was northern Mexico, occurred in the late 1800s, and then of course, after 9/11, with the Patriot Act, is when we saw the really the amplification of the border militarization, the surveillance, and of course the construction. And so the construction of the wall and the waiver of the 28 federal laws in order to construct the border, including the grave sites, was an act that was also supported in the Democratic Party with the Obama administration. So the wall, unfortunately, and the human rights violations that have occurred to indigenous peoples are violations that have occurred throughout several administrations of the United States electoral bodies. And so I think how we need to frame this is very important, in that it's an indigenous rights issue. It's a human rights issue for indigenous peoples who are located on both sides of that border.
Can you talk about the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument? I understand it's a recognized biosphere, and it is also the entire monument is ancestral lands. Can you tell people who are
Yeah.
not familiar with what we're looking at?
well, well, even before the United States, and before Mexico, it's all autumn lands that, after the Gadsden Purchase and the Treaty of Guadalupe, which, we didn't have a actual voice in those making of those that declarations to divide our homelands into two countries. That Oregon Pipe National Monument, as well as other lands like Luke Fair, Golden, Berry Goldwater, Missile Range, and all these so-called government properties are all autumn lands. And so the Organ Pipe National Monument, which is a part of autumn lands, has been under the authority of the monument. The monument have also violated their protection of these lands, as they said, in their declaration, they will protect these lands for public use. However, they've allowed the military to bulldoze our sacred lands. Not only that, but protective cactuses and other plants, and also disturb very pristine and very ancient springs that is adjacent to what is the U.S.-Mexico border, which is on the Organ Pipe National Monument. So it continues this kind of recklessness by policies and to waiver protective laws that protect our plants and our animals have also disturbed our human remains to
Can
the
we,
point where
yes, I
they're just
definitely,
they're
I
just
want to, I want to
fragments.
dig, you're bringing up a lot of different things all at the same time, and I want to dig
Yes,
as deeply as possible into these. So there are so let's start off with tell us what the blasting of the area means for your community, means for the indigenous community there. What damage has already occurred, and what are the
they they
stakes?
have they have fragments of human remains, and they have destroyed plants, and they have not notified the authorities, which is the tribal government people and or the traditional people, that they have not only dug up our remains but have totally destroyed them. So they're just in fragments.
Well, that's horrendous. The Pipe Cactus National Monument also is an internationally recognized biosphere, meaning that it has plants and animals so rare that the UN has given them special designation. So when you're saying it blows up plants, I want to make sure that the audience understands these aren't just any pine trees, which I
No,
love anyway, but these are very rare and precious plants that are supposed to be.
yes, they're very rare, and specifically for this region, there's no other kind of plants that exist anywhere else in the world. And also in the springs, there's very specific species of fish and turtle that are impacted by this whole wall.
What is the spiritual meaning of the site in terms of significance? Its historical meaning for Indigenous people.
You know that it's very difficult to translate that all our land is sacred. Any disturbance of any part of our lands is a disturbance to all the autumn. So when we relate to the saguaro cactus plant, which is grows to be over 200 years old, as our relatives, they are bulldozing our relatives and just throwing them off to the side of the road that they're building without any regard. That's just one example of a plant.
That's horrendous, and I relate and to the sense that the trees and the animals are all our relatives. It must be very difficult to um, see what's
It,
going on not only on the site but all over across the world with what they're doing.
Absolutely. And when when we have our oral history that tells us about these plants and in the beginning of the world, and how our territory, which is the autumn lands, are developed and specifically for us to take care of, and when we have no longer have that authority because of government setting up borders and setting up reservations and setting up separating us from our original lands, it makes it very difficult for especially our young people to understand that we have a deeper commitment and obligation to uphold our way of life through our territory, and being on our territory, and making offerings to our territory. I know all the mountain names and some of the songs of our mountains. That is our way of life, and that is a violation not only of who we are as all of them, but as indigenous people and as people of the land, original people of the land. And you see other countries talking about genocide, and yet here we are. This is the United States. This is happening right here in what is called the United States.
Right. And I think what this really highlights, I think, for the viewers and the audiences, is that this is yet another development project that is occurring without Indigenous peoples' free, prior, informed consent, without their rights or their existence being respected. Indigenous peoples have lived here since time immemorial, regardless of whether it is an oil pipeline, whether it is a uranium mine, whether it is a water development project or wall infrastructure. We live here, we have human rights. And additionally, because we are Indigenous peoples, those rights are directly tied to the land. We cannot exercise our cultural identity and our religious rights without those locations, without those specific places. And so the rights of Indigenous peoples are incredibly unique because they are tied to land, and they are tied to original title to land that existed before the United States was created. And that is the inherent sovereignty, what people call, that exists here in the United States. And so we have another very serious problem with Indigenous peoples not being respected, with the United States and its subsidiaries and agencies not respecting Indigenous peoples' rights to free, prior, informed consent and to their land. And it is incredibly harmful for the cultural survival of Indigenous peoples, many of whom these spiritual practices can go extinct. Many of these languages can go extinct if we are not protecting them. And so when we lose those religious practices, when we lose those ceremonial practices of Indigenous peoples, we lose that knowledge for humanity. And so there's so much value in Indigenous people's knowledge and their existence, and as it relates to land, as it relates to climate change, because we are the stewards and protectors of the last remaining regions of biodiversity on this planet. And so it's always Indigenous peoples now who are on the front lines, whose bodies are on the front lines, holding back development wherever it's really occurring. And this is just another one of those examples. But I think it's very difficult, this conversation, to have, because we really in the United States do not have a historic understanding of how our nation was formed, how that border was constructed, and in fact what existed before it. And what existed before it was the political institutions and the tribal governments and the peoples who existed here with our economic, social, cultural institutions, which continue to be erased. People don't want to acknowledge us, and that's a problem. And so we have to continue to be visible. We have to continue to fight for our rights, not only as Indigenous peoples, but as US citizens, because this also impacts private landowners as well. Private landowners on the US border have consistently had their land condemned through eminent domain. So this isn't just an issue of Indigenous peoples, it's an issue of everyone protecting what is sacred to them, and saying no when those rights are violated.
Ophelia, we've talked, during the course of this interview, we talked about how this is not just a Trump administration issue. It's gone across administrations, I would say, since the founding of the United States. It hasn't really ended. Is the Trump administration's treatment of the land a new level of harassment toward Indigenous communities, or do you see it as, because just a general continuation on the same level?
It's a general continuation of this in the same sense that a government entity has authority to subject the people to human rights violations, to to waiver excuse me to waiver laws that are protective laws that also include our human remains, that include our right to live and exist on our lands. So it's a continuation. But what I can say about the Trump administration, that it brought out outright racism and the right to hate on a whole different level. Because I see America made under this legacy of of killing and genocide of all indigenous people from the very eastern part and the southern part where they landed. You know, so it's a continuation. And I want to talk about the integrated fixed towers. The integrated fixed towers are under construction right now. Um, Kind of the pressure that the governments put on tribal governments to accept you know, these kind of alternatives. The alternative to the 30-foot wall is 180 feet tall towers that will be on, but it also includes grading of new roads, grading of sites of these towers that are going to be. When I asked the Border Patrol, where are you're going to, these towers are will be protecting the American way of life. Where are these towers going? Are there some on the Canadian border? Are there some on the southern border? No, it's just on the Tohono O'odham reservation. Just
Wow.
on the Tohono O'odham reservation. They have no data to tell us how the
Wow.
microwaves will be affecting our lives 25 years from now, how it'll affect our pollinators, the bees, and all these things that will be affected deeply by radiation. One tower digital footprint is 64 miles. So 15 towers on a small area is over, you know, under surveillance. Every inch of our lands will be under surveillance. 9 miles, you can hear and see a person as we're seeing each other's now. 13 miles, you can hear exactly what they're saying.
Right.
Do you have any ideas why they might be doing this?
Well, just for the viewers to know a little bit, when Ophelia's talking about the fixed towers, these are basically alternatives to what they call physical barriers and physical structures between the wall. And so what they want to create is a virtual wall. And a virtual wall is created basically through surveillance towers and technology. And that is how they are planning to increase that border wall protection and infrastructure. And again, it's very problematic because the rights of the Tohono O'odham people have not been fully fully studied, and that includes, you know, how is this going to impact the Tohono O'odham cultural survival for another 50 years if they are daily being surveilled through this very high tech surveillance wall and technology. And also the company in particular, Elbit Systems, which is the company that is constructing these surveillance walls on our US border, is a company that has been known to commit human rights violations in other countries, in particular Palestine. And in fact, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is one of the largest wealth funds in the world, they have a very large investment portfolio. They invest in 1.5% of every publicly traded company. This company was so bad, so egregious in its human rights violations and abuses that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund divested and excluded Elbit Systems from its investment universe, which is basically saying we banish you from our business. And in a world of capitalism, you have to be a really bad actor for people not to do business with you. And that is who has been invited to make their home on the Tohono O'odham Nation. This bad actor who has a record of human rights violation is who we are inviting into the United States of America. And it's not only an issue for Tohono O'odham people, it's an issue for the United States of America, for every single one of us. When Tohono O'odham people's rights are violated, when they are able to be surveilled to this extent, it impacts every single one of our rights in the United States because it erodes our right to privacy too. And
I
so
find this terrifying.
yeah, so everything that's happening on the border is like its own testing ground You know, I don't want the United States to become militarized. I don't want the whole United States to become underneath a fixed tower. That is not
Yeah.
what America should be. It is not what Native America, Indigenous America ever was.
Can you
And,
talk
and
about
this is what we want for our people and for the world.
We've been seeing over the course of the last few administrations, some of the people in our chat have pointed out that Obama turned a blind eye to some of the pipeline, the Apple project and the pipeline issues. How can you talk a little bit about how the policies that they are trying to do on your land are connected to, say, the Keystone Pipeline and other attempts to uproot Native people from their lands?
Oh, me. Um, it's totally militarized. So the militarization and the tactics of militarization, which are human rights violations, is when Standing Rock occurred, it's just a replication of what they've been doing to the Tohono O'odham Nation since after 9/11. When you have a gun held to your head, which happened to me in front of my grandson and my granddaughter. I mean, my daughter and my grandson. When you have a weapon held to your head and forced to say whether you're a US citizen or a Mexican citizen, that is a human right violation that shouldn't happen to anyone. When they dig up your great-great-grandmother's remains, that's a violation of laws. That's occurring on the Tohono O'odham reservation. So these things also happen in Standing Rock. So I want Michelle to talk about. She's very much informed about the connections. Michelle, help me out.
Yeah, like what I was saying before, you know, this is an ongoing rights violations against Indigenous peoples. The US domestic law as a legal regime does not recognize Indigenous peoples' right to free, prior, informed consent. And that right is basically is your right as a peoples to give your consent or to withhold consent. And that should be a basic right for Indigenous peoples, but it is not respected. But what we do have all over the United States is our rights being denied to allow corporate profit, and the police
We understand about that.
and the police in the state and the police in the state have really been captured because they have abdicated their duty to protect Indian people and United States citizens. They have abdicated this for oil and for money. And so in North Dakota, when we look at the injuries that happened, where we have two individuals who were permanently blinded, another individual who almost had their arm amputated. What we heard in the court documents was that this was pain compliance, that the use of this force was pain compliance upon us, that they will force pain upon us to force us to comply with their will. And this is why the Indian Wars in the United States of America has never ended, because we still are fighting for our rights in existence, and we have done nothing more than to be born Indian people on this land. We are guilty of nothing but being born Indian people on this land, and being born Indian is a criminal. We are born criminals because we want to be free in a system of oppression.
What should activists who want to get involved in the fight for the rights of Native peoples do in order to get involved?
I think there's so many things that we can do. Everyone has something to contribute. Everyone has a gift that they can give to protect human rights and Indigenous people's rights. And so if that is going to the front line where some of these situations are occurring, whether that if you're a lawyer and you can provide legal assistance, whether you're a media person and you can invite us on to speak, whether you're a researcher and you want to link up with some of the research that's happening, whether you're a musician and you want to make art regarding this, there's a lot you can do. I think generally for people who vote for someone who is explicitly going to support Indigenous people's human rights.
Do we have anyone like that?
I think Bernie Sanders Bernie Sanders so far has been the only one who has said that he will support indigenous peoples in terms of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And so he has mentioned this, he has verbalized this, and that's more than we have gotten from anyone. So I'm thankful for his effort. I also think that another very easy thing for a lot of people to do is to divest the contractors that are involved in the construction of the wall, to find out who the investors are and put pressure on the investors, and also to put pressure on the banks and financial systems. And so everyone has a bank card, everyone has that tiny little plastic card that no bigger than the size of the palm of your hand. And that is absolutely powerful. Your choice of where you consume, where you put your money, where you store your money is incredibly important. And even when we look at climate change, we know that the financial industry is one of the largest drivers of climate change. And so if we can shift policy, international economic policy with respect to indigenous rights, with climate change, we can hopefully intercept the financial resources before they ever reach the level of human rights violations on the ground. And in Dakota Access Pipeline, we were able to get, for example, the Bank of Norway, DNB, they did in fact stop their investments to the Dakota Access Pipeline for the human rights abuses that were identified. And so there's many people, regardless, even if you're a financial institution, you do have a role and responsibility, and you have a role to play. And everyone can do that. That's what's wonderful about our movement. That's what's wonderful about the human spirit. We are creative people, and we can solve problems when we put our minds and our hearts into it.
Ofelia, I noticed you went outside.
Yes, I did. And then I got a call, so I had to do that.
Oh, I do want to thank you so much for being on the program and for bringing the information out to our audience. And I hope you will join us again. Michelle Cook is a founding member of the Water Protector Legal Collective. And Ofelia Rivas is from the Odom Voice Against the Wall. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're happy to continue to have this conversation and to keep the people updated on the fight.
Absolutely. And we're so thankful for you. What you all are doing is absolutely critical for free speech, for all of these important human rights issues. And we're so thankful for the work that you all do and for having Indigenous peoples on today. We're very thankful.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
And
Thank
keep
you.
up the fight.
Absolutely.